wonderful. What a delightful packed house for our event tonight, celebrating Tess Gunty's The Rabbit Hutch. This is very exciting. We love enthusiasm here at the bookstore here at Green Apple. I'm very excited to have both of these authors with us. And The Rabbit Hutch is just a brand new baby novel in the world. It's only 1 day old. So we're here to welcome it with gifts of frankincense and myrrh or whatever we might bring to it, which is actually your lovely self. So thank you for doing that. I'm also excited to announce, I'm so glad I looked at my paper because I would have forgotten to let you folks know that The Rabbit Hutch is actually our book of the month, or it's our bookseller's choice. The book of the month club is very litigious. It's our bookseller's choice here at Green Apple for the month of August. And we're really excited about that. So it just means we get to give that much extra love to this really great debut novel. And we're excited. I will be very brief in my business. We have a couple of upcoming events, and if you like events like the one you're attending right now, you might like the events that we have coming up. Tomorrow, we have the pleasure of hosting Elaine Castillo and Aro Kwan for Elaine's essay collection, How to Read Now, which is very potent and awesome. And they're two of our favorite writers here in the Bay Area, and we're excited to have them. It's going to be really fun. If you're around, we would love to have you too. We do have a full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. All of our events are free unless stated otherwise. That being said, please do buy books. Please do buy books from us if you can. We always appreciate it. I am not above asking. And I do say it in jest, but in all earnestness, when you buy books from us, you not only support us as an independent bookstore, but you also support the authors who put so much work into writing these books, and then you get to have a book. So that might be the best part of all. So if you are able, we know you can't every time, but if you are able, we always appreciate it. Please do keep your masks on between sips of your beverage. Everyone here has been very cool about it, and I'm so appreciative. Thank you. We're just trying to move forward safer, but also be celebratory. And, you know, it's a tricky time, and we're all just trying to do our best. So I appreciate you being cool. And we also want to give our authors the grace to take theirs off when they're on the microphone. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers that are joining us this evening, and we'll get to the real heart of the matter. First, we have Rachel Khong, who is a writer living here in San Francisco. Her debut novel, Goodbye Vitamin, won the 2017 California Book Award for First Fiction and was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist for First Fiction. From 2011 to 2016, she was the managing editor and then executive editor of Lucky Peach magazine. With Lucky Peach, she also edited a cookbook about eggs called All About Eggs. In 2018, she founded The Ruby, which we are major fans of here at Green Apple. It's a work and event space for women and non-binary writers and artists in the Mission District. Her second novel, Real Americans, is forthcoming from Knopf. Please do welcome Rachel Khong. And last but most certainly not least, Tess Gunty earned an MFA in creative writing from NYU, where she was a Lillian Vernon Fellow. Her work has appeared in the Iowa Review, Joyland, Los Angeles Review of Books, No Tokens, Flash, and elsewhere. She was raised in South Bend, Indiana, and lives in Los Angeles. Her book, The Rabbit Hutch, is the reason we are here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Tess Gunty.
Thank you guys for being here. So many faces I know and love. It's truly so delightful to see you all. Thank you for making the trip. I guess I'll start with just a reading and then we'll get into questions. I think I'll just read from the very beginning, so it doesn't need any explanation. The opposite of nothing. On a hot night in apartment C4, Blondine Watkins exits her body. She's only 18 years old, but she has spent most of her life wishing for this to happen. The agony is sweet, as the mystics promise. It's like your soul is being stabbed with light, the mystics said, and they were right about that too. The mystics call this experience the transverberation of the heart, or the Seraph assault, but no angel appears to Blondine. There is, however, a bioluminescent man in his 50s, glowing like a firefly. He runs to her and yells. Knife, cotton, hoof, bleach, pain, fur, bliss. As Blondine exits herself, she is all of it. She is every tenant of her apartment building. She is trash and cherub, a rubber shoe on the seafloor, her father's orange jumpsuit, a brush raking through her mother's hair, the first and last Zorn automobile factory in Vacaville, Indiana, a nucleus inside the man who robbed her body when she was 14, a pair of red glasses on the face of her favorite librarian, a radish tugged from a bed of dirt. She is no one. She is Katie, the Portuguese water dog, who licked her face whenever the foster family banished them both in the snow because they were in the way. An algorithm for amplified content, and a blue slushie from the gas station. The first pair of tap shoes on the feet of a child actress and the man telling her to try harder. She is the smartphone that films her as she bleeds on the floorboards of her apartment. And she is the chipped nail polish on the teenager who assembled the 90th step of that phone. An American satellite, a bad word, the ring on the finger of her high school theater director. She is every cottontail rabbit grazing on the vegetation of her supposedly dying city. 10 minutes of pleasure igniting between the people who made her, the final tablet of oxycodone on her mother's tongue, the gavel that will sentence the boys to prison for what they're doing to Blondine right now. There is no such thing as right now. She is not another young woman wounded on the floor, body slashed by men for its resources. No, she is paying attention. She is the last laugh. On that hot night in apartment C4, when Blondine Watkins exits her body, she's not everything, not exactly. She's just the opposite of nothing.
Hey, I just want to say congratulations on just such a beautiful book, and it was really a joy to read and so vivid and compelling. I think we can all tell from that first page just how beautiful and singular this book is. So congratulations, first of all. And I guess my first question, because this book is about so many things, is just, I think I write a book because I don't know how to like summarize the book, right? Like it's about more than I can really say succinctly, but I kind of want to ask you to do that right now and tell me what the book is about to you, what was the sort of, what is the heart of it and what were you wanting to write about?
I think that I think of it as a book about sort of earthly purgatories, like whether they're psychological or geographic. I grew up in a town that was kind of structurally neglected and abandoned, and it was really similar to a lot of other towns in that region and a lot of towns around the world. And I think that these landscapes and these people are very kind of neglected in our narratives and our imaginations, and yet it seemed like such a, I think the brutality of the extraction economy is visible in these landscapes in a way that it isn't in other places. And I was really interested in kind of tracing the ways that structural violence and neglect generate interpersonal violence and neglect, which is something that I saw, all the time in my communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about this book actually today, just in my apartment, about all the noises kind of surrounding me and like the lives that were being lived and the sort of unseen lives to me, right? Separate from what I'm living. And I think something that's so interesting about this book is it really has so many characters. There are quite a few kind of main characters and also just these characters in the periphery, but you get to know them kind of quickly because you get to know their like weird fixations and like their very private desires. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how those characters came to be and your interest in like their weird shit.
I like that. Yeah, I guess I'm always really drawn to the peculiarities of someone that I meet. I think truth is kind of revealed in aberration. I think it's revealed in the things that we're willing to be strange about. And I find people who kind of lean into their strangeness, I find that to be an almost act of defiance and hope against forces of normalization. And yet they also often reveal, deeply rooted fears or pain or desire. And so every character kind of arrived to me with their most extreme quality. It was like, what if a man covered himself in the liquid of glow sticks and punished his enemies by freaking them out? And what if there was a teenage girl who wasn't quite really religious, but she wanted to be a mystic? And what if there were three boys who took to animal sacrificing to express their interest in her? And so everything kind of came to me like a punchline that was missing its joke. And then you had to, I mean, it took me 6 years to write this, and the task ahead was to make those qualities not only believable, but kind of inevitable in the context of the book. And anytime there was a quality that just didn't end up making any sense, I cut that character, or I changed their description. But I think that for me, the peculiarities were definitely the entrance into every single character in the book.
We talk also about just Vacaville, the place, and it's an imagined town, a fictional town. Can you talk about just some of your influences and or how you came up with it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of I wanted to model it on several different towns in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt: Flint, Michigan, Gary, Indiana, Youngstown, Ohio, Detroit, and then of course my own town. And so when it came to specific, the map or the history of the automobile industry that used to be there, I modeled that off of my hometown because it was what I knew the best. But I also wanted to take things from other places because I wanted this to be about the sort of post-industrial narrative and not just one specific place. There's a university in my hometown, and that absorbed some of the economic shock when Studebaker automobiles kind of abruptly closed in the 1960s. And so I think while many people were still economically orphaned after this, there were a lot of people who were able to transition to other jobs. There was this other source of major employment that was available. But in a lot of other places in the Rust Belt, there wasn't another industry that could kind of that could provide for the citizens of that place. And so I think I was also really interested in the ways that this kind of manufacturing dream was pitched as the ultimate American achievement, when in fact, the rampant extraction economy kind of conjured these places into existence and then swiftly destroyed them. And I think that exposes something really true about the brutality of unregulated capitalism. And to me, that's kind of, my brother always jokes that that's the villain of the book, capitalism. But I do think it's at the root of a lot of kind of American crises right now. And so it seemed like not choosing a specific town to model this on, but taking things from everything, from all these places, allowed me to, I suppose, explore the sort of, the larger patterns that you see among them.
I think I read or heard that you sort of started this book in Prospect Park in New York, and I know you live in Los Angeles now. Has living in these different places sort of informed the way that you look at your home state and where you come from?
Yeah, definitely. I think in some ways I couldn't have written this book while I was still living there, because you kind of lose the forest for the trees. I don't think you can see things as clearly when you're right up against them. And I think also I needed just a little bit of distance to sort of access the tenderness that I felt toward the place that I had actually longed to get away from for a long time. Being in New York also kind of taught me. I was living in Crown Heights, and I think that the Rabbit Hutch, the building in this book where most of the characters live, was also inspired by the building I was living in Brooklyn, and sort of like it made me think about the ways that these forces of neglect can manifest all over the country, all over the world, in very different communities with very different contexts, but kind of produce similar results, which is to say people are left without recourse, and they're made unsafe, and they have to, I think, both, sort of retreat into their own privacy to defend themselves, but also rely on each other to defend themselves. And so those are so many similarities I saw between a very, very different neighborhood in Brooklyn and my hometown, in the neighborhood where I grew up. And I think that being in other cities, I think it also gave me a sense of maybe protectiveness toward the Midwest. Like, I think I remember being at the New York Philharmonic once, and there's this woman next to me in furs, and she kind of looked like she'd never left Manhattan. And she was like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Indiana." And she gasped. And she was like, "I didn't know anyone was from Indiana. Did you turn the lights off when you left?" Oh my God. And that's so absurd. But it was a kind of attitude that I encountered in more diluted forms, like very often. And I think, especially with the presidential election in 2016, like I could see how a lot of people in New York and now in LA were kind of shocked by the result. And I think that if you were living in the heartland, like you were raised among the ideologies that kind of got that person elected. So it's like it's easy to, I guess it's harder to it's easier to place the Midwest in this kind of national context now that I'm no longer living there.
So, another aspect of this book is just you bring in so many different forms, I guess, and a lot of sort of these like internet-y voices and comments. There's like an online obituary section. It's a lot of, lively comments and just even the graffiti, I think, in this town, has a lot of just, this like polyphonic, voice situation. And I guess I always think of the internet as like a thing that I need to like turn off in order to write. And I'm wondering how you sort of, what your decision was to put it into this novel. And I think like put it in so tenderly, there's often like these like really wild comments and then like one or two really kind of vulnerable, sweet ones. So yeah, just what were you thinking about the internet and, putting it into this text?
Well, I'm with you in terms of needing to distance myself from it and turn it off while I'm writing. But I do find that comment sections are sort of my guilty pleasure. Like every time I look up anything, the first thing I look at, and I have an Instagram, but I don't have Twitter or Facebook anymore. And so in a way, like comment sections are my social media. And I find them to be places of, of course, vitriol, cruelty, and bots, but also like surprising humor and surprising tenderness. And often I think it's the context of anonymity that makes the tenderness feel more moving. Like when I was looking up like a cooking tutorial recently, and there was it was, I think, on deviled eggs, and it was all the comments were, most of them were like fairly normal comments. You got a few just completely insane like political comments. And then you got this one man commented about how his mother was dying of congestive heart failure and all she wanted were deviled eggs, but he was a mechanic, he didn't know how to cook. He was like, and this tutorial really helped me. You made it seem so easy. Thank you so much. And everyone started commenting on his thread saying, "We're wishing you peace. We hope your mother's okay. Like, here's something that I went through that's really similar." And I was almost moved to tears at this deviled eggs cooking tutorial because it was such a, I think when you're granted anonymity, the kindness ends up meaning more than the cruelty. It's easy to be cruel when you have no responsibilities to an identity. But to be kind when you have nothing really to gain from it. That's very moving to me. And so I wanted to put that, I guess that was one thing that drew me to replicating these kinds of contexts in my book.
That reminds me that I was doing like a yoga with Adrian the other day, and it was a yoga for transitions. And someone commented about their transition from, I think, female to male, and so many sweet comments beneath that one, and checking in kind of year after year to see how it was going. And it seems like it's going well. Yeah. I wanted to talk, of course, about Blondine, who's, I think, the closest thing to a main character in this book. And she's this teenage girl who is obsessed with Hildegard von Bingen, who I was also kind of obsessed with actually as a teenager, like a freshman in college. But Hildegard and Blondine kind of have, I think, a lot of things in common. They're both young women who are both vulnerable and I think, assert their agency ultimately. And also both have like really wide-ranging interests and just a lot of different intellectual pursuits. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about that character and what drew you to writing her.
I love that you were also obsessed with Hildegard von Bingen as a
She's
teenager.
very cool.
She's very cool. I mean, I think specifically with Hildegard, as I said, one of the earliest things I knew about her was that about Blondine was that she was trying to be a mystic, and I think that kind of led me back to the female Catholic mystics that I sort of grew up hearing about. I grew up very Catholic, and I always found those women to be such compelling figures because within this like highly patriarchal culture, they were able to achieve some kind of power over their own lives and some kind of agency. And of course, they weren't like radical icons who were overthrowing the institutions. They were operating within these systems. But when I was reading some of their writing, I noticed that a lot of them adopted a very submissive tone, even in their spiritual writings. But Hildegard doesn't. She does occasionally when she's trying to address like a bishop or something to get something she wants. But it seems kind of performed. Like it seems like she kind of knows she's playing a game and she has to play by the rules. But when she's writing her own work, she has this unabashed confidence about her intellect, about her interests. And of course, and when you read some of her, she invented a language, she wrote music, she is sometimes considered the founder of natural history in Germany. And she was also, she wrote like medical texts, which are really wonky. We're like, wow, this is hamster skins, okay. But she just had this enormous confidence in her brain. And I think, especially for her time period, she was, in the 12th century, in 12th century Germany, like she was an enormously, I suppose that was the thing that kind of connected her to Blondine. I think Blondine sees no way out of her oppressive context. I don't think she doesn't have money. She doesn't have any degrees. She doesn't even really have a desire to leave her hometown. And so she's looking for models for how to exist within corrupt systems and kind of overthrow them from the inside. And in Hildegard, she not only sees this kind of intellectual companion, but she sees this kind of political companion as well.
I was just curious about Blondine's beauty. I think it's, every male character who encounters her finds her incredibly beautiful. And, there's some bad things that happen as a result of that. Why is she beautiful?
I think that in a way it was a kind of narrative tool to create a very magnetic character. And she's not just magnetic because she's considered physically beautiful, but I think she also has this kind of almost like a spookiness to her that intrigues people. And she doesn't behave in socially normal ways. And I think that's also kind of intriguing to others as much as it's off-putting. And I think I was really interested in writing a heroine who was kind of offered the currency of beauty through no choice of her own and rejects it at an early age because she kind of sees that it's a false currency. She intuitively understands that it's more entrapping than it is freeing. And I think, it's obvious that girls from a very young age are taught to believe that this is your most potent form of economic mobility. And if you could achieve this, then, and of course, then you're offered 1,000 products to help you achieve it. But if you can achieve it, then you will be worthy of mobility, of love, of attention. And I think it was just really, it was gratifying to write someone who who was only 18 and just knew that all of that was bullshit. And I think also in literature, I often found growing up that there were, for some reason, it seemed like female characters had to choose, like they had to choose between being kind of like brainy and nerdy or being these kinds of beautiful, vapid creatures. And I think I just was really frustrated by that dichotomy. And it seemed to me that her beauty was a kind of, it made her horribly visible. It makes her horribly visible in this book. And it's not a visibility that makes her feel seen ever.
Yeah, I think, sort of related to, being told what is valuable about yourself. I was thinking a lot about just these characters who I think are so, Blondine especially, but who are so sort of committed to who they are, and what they're interested in. I think, maybe it was a little bit easier for Hildegard Wandingen before the internet, but I feel like, just constantly bombarded, obviously, with like messages and news and just so much internet stuff and just like, there's a lot that we're swimming in right now. And I think I was just curious about your own like inputs and like how like what feeds into your art essentially. Like I've been thinking just a lot personally about wanting to I think like make sure that I'm pursuing and reading about like what I really want to be reading about instead of what I'm told to read about. So I think, yeah, I'm just sort of curious about how, and if you do that for yourself and how that informs your art, just the things that you consume.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to be cognizant of, because as you say, we're being programmed all the time now to be drawn to certain things. And so for me, actually, it's about I guess I'm trying to always actively deprogram that programming. And I just was listening to an interview with a person who deprograms cults members, former cult members, current cult members, and he was once in a cult himself. And he was being interviewed by the Center for Humane Technology guys who do the podcast, Your Undivided Attention. And they were trying to draw the parallels between cult tactics, tactics of the leaders for recruitment and entrapment and social media. And then I listened right after that to an interview with a woman who specializes in the conditions that create civil wars in countries all over the world. And what was so alarming about both of those interviews, but also kind of illuminating, was that both of those fields had so much to teach us about the way that social media and the internet generally is programming our brains. And I remember there was this one statistic that the woman who studies civil war cited. She said something like, for years around the world, the number of democracies were decreasing for the first time, like in recent decades. And the only place where that wasn't happening was Africa. But then in 2019, Africa started to follow the same pattern as the rest of the world. And that was when the internet was introduced in Africa. It was the last of the countries that were surveyed that received the internet. And so I do think that there's a direct correlation between the internet and these sort of like structural crises that we're facing. So I generally try to stay off of it and to read without, to read into interest without any kind of agenda. Like, I think the best reading experiences you have are the ones that you have no idea how they're going to feed into your work. Generally, I try to read always trying to read contemporary poetry, something that's really dialogue driven, like a play, nonfiction that's a subject that I don't know anything about, and then kind of more immersive, very plot driven fiction. I think like that diet is the diet that always makes me happiest.
So here it's very cold in this neighborhood in particular. This novel takes place over like 3, I think, very hot days. Can you talk about both the heat and the brevity, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I think that the 3 days gave me an opportunity to put some sort of scaffolding on the book and some limitations. Because there's so many characters, I think that it could have been endless chaos. So I had to kind of impose some rules. And one was that there wasn't much backstory. If there's ever backstory, it's because it has to do with something immediately happening in the present. That most of the characters live in this one building, and that it takes place over these 3 days. And for me, that was the only way that I could have structured so many voices without losing control. And I remember my brother's partner sent me something she saw on Twitter. It was like, I love novels where it's just the hottest day of the year and everyone's really upset. She's like, this is your reader. I think that is a genre. It's true. And
There's going to be more.
there's going to be more, right? And I think one of the most alarming predictions surrounding the climate crisis is like that heat increases correlate to violence increase, and not just kind of interpersonal violence, but like political violence as well. And like the French Revolution sort of broke out during a really, really hot, summer, and there was like, so I think heat, it's well documented that it increases aggression, it makes people think less rationally. And it also kind of gave me a chance I was really interested, I'm always in the readings, the books that I love the most have a kind of otherworldly glint to them. And like Joy Williams, and I think Nicole Krauss really achieves this well, and many others, where there's something slightly unreal about the reality that's being depicted. And that depiction ends up kind of tilting your worldview a little bit so that everything looks new. And adding intense heat to the narrative kind of allowed me to achieve a little bit of that otherworldly glint.
Like literal glintiness.
Yes, sweating.
Yeah,
Everyone's
sweating. I want to open it up soon to questions, so I just want to remind folks to be thinking of your questions. And I think there might be also internet people with questions, so you can think about questions too. I guess I wanted to ask about rabbits and why rabbits really recur a lot in the novel. I felt a little triggered because actually I went to a ranch camp once when I was like 9 years old, and they gave out awards at the end of the camp, and I got 3rd place for rabbit cage cleaning. Like, 3rd place. And I just remember like the shame of the fact that they had even given me I would have rather had nothing. It was just really, I think I still have it actually.
Keeps you humble.
Yeah.
I guess I'm really drawn to rabbits as a recurring image because they evoke so many conflicting associations. Like we associate them with Easter and also magic tricks and Playboy, and they're also pets, but they're also meat, and they're kind of the white rabbit obviously in Alice in Wonderland is this kind of portal into another world. And there's Donnie Darko, and it goes on. And what's so interesting to me is that each of these associations kind of lights up a very different part of your brain. But they also gave me an opportunity to think about predators and prey, and the way I kind of always wanted to trouble that binary in the book. And anytime that a predator is depicted, I wanted to also show that it was vulnerable to being preyed upon in some way or had been. And I had written some of this very first draft, and I had like rabbits kept occurring, but you kind of try not to analyze your writing until you're done with the draft, otherwise it dies. But I watched Roger and Me, this documentary by Michael Moore about his hometown, Flint, Michigan. And there's a scene, this movie really is about this kind of economic decline at the post-industrial city. And there's a scene where he goes to, he's driving and he sees a sign on the side of the road that said, "Rabbits, pets, or meat." And he pulls over and he talks to this woman, and she has lost her job, and she's taken to breeding rabbits for a living. And she says the first question she asks is pets or meat, because she keeps them in separate cages and people want them for different things. And she says, which is like now the epigraph of the book, something about how you have to keep the male, you have to castrate the males, otherwise essentially they'll castrate each other, because they're all kind of kept in this very, very small cage. And that to me was not only just such a disturbing image, but it seemed to kind of encapsulate what I wanted to think about, which is horizontal violence. Like how does they want to attack the cage, they want to kill the cage, but they can't, and so they attack each other. And that's kind of what I see happening in places that have suffered from disinvestment, that don't have opportunities for people, that aren't offering kind of ways out. And actually what people want is to overthrow the system, but they can't.
The cage is capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have questions from the audience?
Yeah, the comment or a question or whatever you thought. It was your comment about how the internet creates this sense of like the anonymousness or whatever it does to our society to create tension and problems. I read something a while ago that was really made me feel better about all this. And that is, whenever there is a new type of communication technology, the printing press, there was violence, there was disruption, societies fell, all this stuff happened. Same with radio, same with television, same with the internet.
Yeah.
And so through all of that, there's a massive new change and like the ability for people to be given knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel like that could happen again? Do you feel like we can turn into a sort of a positive out of this negative that's happening right now?
Harsh, should it be repeated for the internet? I don't know if I can repeat that, but is the internet, is it possible that the internet might be good? Yes.
Looking back at history, how these new types of communication technology came in, how it transformed the society, and in that transformation,
Yes.
there are elements of society that don't want that to happen. So there's violence, and there's activity, there's a put down of people. But then there is a transition, and it's happened over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually also just was reading something about this, and I think it is really hopeful. I think that society, I guess, has a way of sort of self-adjusting after a period of turmoil. And I do think that you're right that it has to do with the democratizing effects of the technology. I guess what I find hard to imagine is because tech companies are so good at sort of controlling the reality that we live in, and I guess it's hard for me to imagine how this will end up kind of self-adjusting, but I do think it's really possible. And I guess people like those kind of the Center for Humane Technology, which I referenced earlier, that gives me a lot of hope. It's a place that's really thinking about how to regulate this this unregulated system and how to make it ethical. And usually the solutions are so simple, actually. It's like changing a little piece of coding or making a different incentive that will, like help people be more like incentivize, connection rather than vitriol. So maybe that's where part of the solution lies. And I also see people
counter to what's going on. It has to be somebody. There's enough intelligence out there to counter the things that are happening negative.
Right. Like they won't just correct themselves.
There's a book, I saw the cover of it down there that said something like how to fix some major problems in the world for like near $1 trillion. And that was great. It's like, things can be done when you choose to make the changes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, maybe the internet needs someone to go through the comments and delete some.
Yeah.
Just like a character in the Rabbit Hutch does.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost following the comment that you just made, you talked about living in the Rabbit Hutch in Brooklyn and there's anonymity or dependence on these neighbors that you really don't know and some anonymity there. You didn't say it at the time, but I kind of made a connection in my brain that I'm going to speak to egg recipe,
Mhm.
and if there's some sort of a connection there. Where we're
Yeah.
also, silently dependent on each other. in a
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, I think that's a really that's a great connection to make. I think if there's any people keep asking me like in interviews if I haven't if anything gives me hope about that's always the last question, like what gives you hope about this world? And I always struggle to answer it, but I do think that the only answer that ever seems true to me is rooting your faith in your immediate community and investing in your neighbors, your family, all those just immediately around you, and the politics immediately around you, and the services immediately around you. I think that when most of us think about kind of overthrowing huge global systems, it's easy to succumb to despair. But if you kind of step out of that anonymity or even remain within it, but still care for those around you, like in that building that I lived in Brooklyn, I remember there was always a lot of like drama in the lobby about like plants getting stolen. Like people would steal each other's plants and they'd leave these terrible notes for each other, like God sees you and you're gonna be punished for this. And it was, but then one day I came down to the lobby and there was this, it was totally decorated in beautiful Christmas decorations. And a lot of, like most of us in that building did not have a lot of disposable income. And yet someone had taken the time to do this. And there was a bunch of letters taped to the wall saying like, thank you to the Williams sisters for doing this. They've always brought, and it was a time where a lot of electricity was being cut off to people and they didn't have heat. And yet someone said like, but you're bringing warmth to this building. And no one signed it, and those women who decorated didn't go out of their way to brag about it or take credit. But it did seem like a little, if more moments like that could happen in your immediate communities, then they would have this kind of, the opposite of a trickle down effect.
So you had mentioned that this had taken you about 6 years to write, right? I was listening to a podcast and there's a great quote from one of my favorite movie directors, and I think he said something along the lines of, like, movies aren't finished, they're just abandoned. And I'm just curious, obviously this is like super personal. It's your first one. You're already working on your second one. Did you kind of feel the same thing about it? Like at a certain point, it just had to be like dropped, not necessarily in like Jordan way, but just like, it had to happen at some point, right?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that quote before and thought that is so true. I really relate to that. I think I'm sure you have a similar experience. Like it is, you could just indefinitely try to improve something, but I do think at some point you end up also reaching the energy out of it and maybe losing sight of what originally was generating, that light. And so I also found the editing process to be definitely the most stressful of this entire publication, because it's like your last chance to improve it. And you have a lot of, fear every day. Waiting, like, am I doing everything that I possibly can to make this better? And I think that now that that's over, and it's in the world, I anticipated this part to be really scary, but it's so much more serene than editing, because it's like you don't have any control over it anymore. And people are gonna hate it or they're not, and you can't do anything about it. Whereas when you're editing, you're like, I have control over how this is going to register. What's your experience like with this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think it's only ever abandoned and never finished. But I think, the thing is, when you're working on something for so long, you change as a person, and some of that change is good, right? You come to the work as a different person and like more able to actually look at it differently. But there's a point, I think, at which you almost get too far away from that, and it's like too far away from that original intent or who that person was, and I think at that point then you have to kind of walk slowly backward
Into the bushes.
into the bushes.
Would you like to see reading your book?
Oh,
Part of society.
that's such an interesting question. I mean, I guess a lot of the fiction that I love is not really is not going to resonate with everyone. And I like it because it's kind of relentlessly itself and it's not trying to please everyone. But I also think it would always have been a mistake for that author to eliminate certain, like certain audiences and assume that those people wouldn't be interested. And so I guess when I'm writing, I try not to eliminate anyone and to think, how can I make this, I suppose, as full of kind of, if I'm relating to every character in some way, then there's a better chance that anyone else might find something of themselves in that character or find something at least humane about that character. And so I don't think I have a group of people or a kind of an ideal reader. I think I'm always delighted when the book kind of reaches someone that I would never have given it to, what about you when you're writing?
I want to ask you if you've heard from people yet of like anyone unexpected during this book. I know one day book tour, but
right before I arrived here, I received a 5-paragraph email from an elderly man I met once at a literary event in Paris. And I remember like when I met him, it was just a few months ago, he kind of monologued at me and then like forced me to give him my email. And so I haven't heard from him since. And I got this email and it was just 5 paragraphs of how disappointed he was in my novel and how much he hated it. And I was like, all right, it's not your book. Like, who are you?
You have really made it.
That's all I've heard so far. Did you end up hearing from a lot of people, like from, I don't know, distant realms of your past?
I think it's when you write a book, it's just so amazing, like who it reaches, right? Like I think you're inhabiting one kind of body. But just like books resonate with all sorts of people, and like the books that you love often don't have anything to do with like a demographic or whatever, or even like interests on paper. So for my book, when it came out, I think it was, a little while after it had come out, I got a sort of email through my website from some men in San Jose, sort of older men, who said they called themselves the Boys Book Club. Shout out to the Boys Book Club, the BBC. And they invited me down to like drink beer and have burgers and talk about the book. And I did it and it was wonderful. They were so sweet. And it was maybe, like, I don't know, 10 of them. It was really wonderful. And it was just so unexpected because my book is about a 30-year-old woman who, whose dad has Alzheimer's, and she's sort of like at a crossroads and very aimless. And these were just these older gentlemen who really identified with her, I think. So that was lovely.
Right, that's the power of fiction, is that you can kind of transcend these identity categories and find things to empathize with and relate to. And
And I think that your book has so many characters, from all these different situations. I did want to know, actually, if I could squeeze in another question, if you knew anybody who covered themselves in glow stick stuff.
It's autofiction. Actually, that idea did come to me because when I was maybe 16 or 17, I was at a friend's house and there were glow sticks and somebody accidentally broke one open. And it was like the lights were kind of off and everyone was dancing, and they started like splattering it on everyone around, and then everyone started doing it and we were all just glowing. It was like probably cancerous compound. But I did think, what if there was someone who was doing this on purpose? And like it was a habit. What would that guy be like?
Correct.
Anonymous attendee asks, how did you get the inspiration for the main plot of the book, and why this story of all the stories?
What is the main plot of the book? I mean, I think that there are, I think, two kinds of writers they're more than that. But I do think that some people can outline and know everything that they're going to do beforehand. And some people can't. And I'm one of the latter. I tend to try to be willfully sort of blind the entire time so that I'm just, there's that E.L. Doctorow quote about like, you can only see a few feet in front of you because the fog is so thick and it's night and your headlights are on, but you can get home like that. And I think that so the plot is sort of came together though when I had all these disparate elements. I had all these kinds of different scenes and characters that I knew were going to collide in some way. And it was when my editor, John Freeman, who was then my professor at NYU, asked all of us in this class to map out our projects. And the map could take any form, but I ended up just making note cards of the structure, the characters, the scenes, the places, the themes, and kind of taping them around my room in Brooklyn and moving them around as I went. And I ended up keeping those up for like 4 years. And that was really helpful to me to kind of live inside the structure. And that was how I kind of saw, okay, this is irrelevant. I have to delete that. I can't find a way to connect these things. And everything ended up being moved around or deleted or, radically changed. But I think that every writer has multiple novels that even, this novel could have been an infinite number of novels. Every term is kind of like the multiverse, or you sort of, when you make a decision, all possible paths sort of split open for you, and it could have been a different decision, and then that would lead you to a totally different novel. And so I tried to just write in such a way that I'm surprising myself and that I feel that it's forcing me to take on challenges that I don't know how to complete. And then, you can always have faith, and you don't have to cram everything into every book. It would be a bad book if you tried to do that. So you also have to just have faith that you can write another thing after this, and it will be something entirely different.
Do you have any other questions? Yeah.
Have you started your next novel?
Yes, I have. It's due in February. So I was like, when I got the book deal originally, it was for 2 books, and they said, the next one's due in February. I was like, a whole year, no problem. I can write the whole thing. And of course, this one took me 6 years. We shouldn't have so much. But I have the first 100 pages of that one drafted, and I was like, I'm going to finish it by the time my first one's published, so that I don't get messed up by the criticism or the feedback. And nope, I didn't do that.
A friend of mine told me today, well, first of all, she said to wish you a happy book birthday. But the other thing she said was it's really good to always stop writing when you have a good idea or you're unfinished with an idea, rather than to finish something and then go to bed. Is that how you work, or do you?
I think I heard Hemingway say something similar, right?
Yeah.
I do. I don't do. I wish I did. That's a good advice. I'm gonna call it that. I think that I end up getting kind of when it's going well, I end up just trying to ride that way kind of manically until it totally dies. But I don't think that's sustainable. So what about you? What do you do?
I think I do all the things at different times. Yeah, it just depends on the day, right? Yeah, sometimes it feels good and other times it feels very bad. Yeah, that's for sure. Can you talk a little bit about your next novel, or is it too soon?
I guess I'll say that it's structured in 3 connected novellas. 3 characters who are united by a kind of freak attack, and I think it's going to span quite a large amount of time.
I'm kind of curious, because you kind of touched on a little bit about your process. Do you have a sort of set schedule, or how you work in your writing? Each day or a certain time?
Well, I think now that I can write full time, it's been a real blessing because I can get into a schedule. But when I was writing this book, I was nannying a lot. I was working as a research assistant, writing science copy, and I just had a lot of kind of freelance jobs. And so it was always just sneaking in time. I always had one day during the week where I tried to only work on the writing, and then But now that I have more of a ability to focus on this, I guess I always have to take a very long walk in the morning. That really helps me. And then I try to not take any electronics with me and just maybe take some books, notebooks. And then I go to, there's this little meadow near my apartment, and I just try to read and write there for as long as I can without any technology. And then usually if it's going well and the reading is motivating, I will get to a point where I can no longer focus on the text because because it's inspiring so much for my own work. And that's when I go home and I usually edit first, and then the revision usually turns into writing kind of naturally. And you have to do administrative tasks too whenever you can.
This is our last question.
Oh, it's
Yes.
probably let somebody else do it.
No, you should do it.
Okay. No, so you said you bring books with you in the morning that you read. Is that research for your books, or is this books? Is that just general reading that you prefer to do?
It's both. Usually though, I guess the research I tend to do at night, or I guess not right before a writing session. What I tend to read right before a writing session is mostly poetry, actually. And I think kind of language-driven work. For some reason, that's always what motivates me most.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming out. Car, is there anything you want to add from Green Apple, or?
I think I'll just encourage everyone to give one more round of applause.